It is a delicious, if utterly baffling irony that the very mental state now aggressively medicated and pathologized, anxiety, was likely a crucial, if not primary, ingredient in our ancestors' unlikely survival. Forget the brave hunter, the stoic gatherer. Imagine instead the perpetually jumpy cave dweller whose internal alarm bells, ringing constantly at the slightest rustle or shadow, gifted him precisely the edge needed to avoid becoming a saber-toothed tiger's afternoon snack. This isn't just about a primal fight or flight, it's about a pervasive anticipatory dread that reshaped entire neural pathways, forcing an evolutionary advantage from what we now perceive as a debilitating flaw. If you're intrigued by the counterintuitive history of human survival and psychology, consider subscribing to uncover more paradoxes. The question isn't whether anxiety existed, but how this insidious unease, this constant state of low-grade alert, wasn't merely a byproduct of a dangerous world, but an active, indispensable tool in carving a path through it. The Narn-anxious, you see, simply didn't make it to the gene pool party. They were too busy admiring the scenery while the predator approached. Their serene dispositions were admirable, certainly, but tragically incompatible with the brutal exigencies of the Pleistocene. Our persistent struggle with anxiety today, therefore, isn't a modern failing. It's a testament to its ancient success, a deeply ingrained evolutionary echo reverberating through brains still largely wired for threats that simply no longer exist, at least not in the same snarling, toothy form. The mechanism was elegantly brutal. An overactive imagination, constantly catastrophizing, always assuming the worst-case scenario, often proving precisely correct, thereby reinforcing its own value. This wasn't merely stress, it was a proactive systemic neurobiological strategy for survival. Our distant ancestors inhabited a world that was, by modern standards, a lethal lottery played daily. There were no seatbelts, no warning labels, just raw, unadulterated peril at every turn. A rustle in the tall grass wasn't just wind, it was potentially a stalking leopard. A shift in the wind wasn't merely a change in weather, it signaled an approaching blizzard or a rival tribe's scent. In such an environment, the calm, collected individual, the one who remained unperturbed, was often the first to be eliminated from the gene pool. Natural selection, with its brutal efficiency, favored the twitchy, the hypervigilant, the one whose internal monologue constantly screamed danger, even in moments of relative calm. This wasn't a choice, it was a hardwired physiological imperative. The release of cortisol and adrenaline, which now manifests as debilitating panic attacks in air-conditioned offices, then honed senses to an almost supernatural degree, sharpening peripheral vision, amplifying subtle auditory cues, and accelerating reaction times to fractions of a second. Imagine a proto-human whose heart rate spiked, whose pupils dilated, whose muscles tensed, not just when a predator was visible, but upon sensing a faint, unfamiliar odor on the breeze. This anticipatory response, this primal anxiety, permitted evasive action before direct confrontation, allowing for retreat to a safer vantage point or the preparation of defensive measures. It was the body screaming run before the eyes even registered the threat, a preemptive defense mechanism that prioritized survival over comfort or composure. The cost was constant unease. The benefit was continued existence. The evolution of anxiety progressed beyond mere reflex, integrating with our burgeoning cognitive abilities to form a sophisticated, albeit often uncomfortable, survival strategy. As hominids developed larger brains and more complex thought processes, anxiety transformed from an immediate, reactive response to a powerful tool for foresight and planning. It wasn't enough to simply flee the leopard. The truly anxious individual began to map its hunting grounds, observe its patterns, and develop long-term strategies to avoid it entirely. This cognitive overlay meant constantly replaying past failures, imagining future calamities, and meticulously planning to avert them. The constant dread of starvation drove the arduous labor of food storage, the meticulous tracking of seasonal resources, and the innovation of rudimentary preservation techniques like smoking and drying. The fear of cold spurred the development of elaborate shelters and the mastery of fire. In essence, Anxiety became the relentless taskmaster of human ingenuity. It fueled the meticulous craftsmanship of a spear, not just for today's hunt, but for the looming threat of tomorrow's unknown encounter. This continuous internal dialogue, this neural habit of worst-case scenario forecasting, allowed ancient humans to anticipate cyclical droughts, predict animal migrations, and strategically position themselves for optimal survival. The brain, perpetually on high alert, became an expert risk assessment engine, constantly calculating probabilities of threat and reward, ensuring that precious energy was expended on preparations rather than on futile endeavors. This wasn't merely problem solving, it was problem anticipating, a vital cognitive leap. Beyond individual survival, anxiety played a critical, often understated role in fostering social cohesion and the intricate dynamics of group living. A lone anxious hominid might survive a specific threat, but a tribe of anxious hominids could thrive. Shared vigilance became a communal early warning system, where the heightened awareness of one individual rapidly propagated through the group, prompting collective action. The individual who constantly scanned the horizon, whose nervous energy translated into meticulous watchkeeping, provided an invaluable service to the entire community. This shared apprehension about the unknown, about crop failures, disease, rival tribes, or the whims of nature, also facilitated the development of rituals, belief systems, and communal practices. Early forms of religion and superstition, often rooted in attempts to control or appease perceived threats, provided psychological comfort and reinforced group identity, effectively externalizing and collectivizing individual anxieties into a manageable, shared framework. A shaman performing a rain dance, driven by the communal anxiety of drought, wasn't just a spiritual leader. He was a practical solution provider, realigning the group's mental state and fostering a sense of control. The internal threat of social ostracization or the external threat of group dissolution also fueled cooperative behaviors, ensuring individuals contributed to the collective defense and resource acquisition out of a primal fear of isolation and vulnerability. Anxiety in this context wasn't just about avoiding a predator, it was about solidifying the bonds of society itself, ensuring the continuity of the genetic line by making the anxious individual a vital, if sometimes irritating, cog in the collective survival machine. The profound irony, then, is that the very neurobiological machinery that ensured our ancestors' arduous march to global dominance now frequently sabotages our daily existence. Our brains, honed over millennia to detect immediate, tangible threats, the rustle of a predator, the shadow of an enemy, the pangs of imminent starvation, are now hopelessly mismatched with the largely abstract dangers of the 21st century. The constant low-level activation of the sympathetic nervous system, designed to prime us for physical fight or flight, instead manifests as chronic stress, generalized anxiety disorder, and an epidemic of mental unease in a world where true physical peril is comparatively rare for most. Our ancestral wiring, which brilliantly processed every anomaly as a potential danger, now fixates on impending deadlines, social media metrics, perceived slights in emails, and the daunting mortgage payment, eliciting the same full-throttle physiological response that once saved us from a charging rhino. The what-if scenarios, once a life-saving cognitive strategy for preparing for droughts or predicting predator movements, now trap us in endless loops of rumination about hypothetical social gaffes or economic downturns. This ancient survival mechanism, robust and effective in its original context, has become a maladaptive burden, turning our internal alert system against ourselves. We are, quite literally, victims of our own success, inheriting a hypersensitive threat detector that excels at finding non-existent lions in the meticulously curated gardens of modernity. The uncomfortable truth is that our pervasive anxiety isn't a sign of weakness. It's the lingering, inconvenient echo of an evolutionary superpower that, in a world devoid of actual predators, just refuses to shut up.